There we go. Are we on? Are we going? Okay. I think we've got audio now. I think that does it. I think that got us. So red is no audio. Yep. I can turn the sound off apparently. So blue, like, see if this makes a difference in the sound. Is it getting quieter as I go down? Because as soon as it shifts to red, it should go quiet. Now this should be multi-directional, so this should pick up sound from across the room in all directions. And then shifting back, I don't know if it goes more quiet as I get closer to the... That should be more... There we go. Okay, got that figured out. Got the web. This is all on my new laptop too. So I got the webcam up and running. I didn't install the fiddly features on it yet, so I don't have the software. Omni was noisy. It's probably picking up the fan from the back of the laptop that it's resting on. Let's see. What is... There's another little knob on the front, and I don't know what it does. I should probably figure that out at some point. But yeah, so it's got this one here is the one that, as you shift it, it shifts color to red when mute and green. Green is the room, the omnidirectional. Not sure what this little guy up front does. I think that might be a volume. That's low. That's 18. Oh, a little gauge on the side came up, said 18. So if we crank this up, can we get louder? Do we get louder? That might be kind of loud. I don't know what it's doing. That seems like it might be a volume of some kind. That's at 100. Oh, now it dropped down to 68. I don't know what it's doing. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I don't know. I'll have to figure that out. Because it doesn't seem like it's a set value. When I crank it, it goes all the way up to 100, and it's still room I can go further, but it drops. I don't understand what it's doing. Okay, so does it say? Yeah, I'm playing with all this stuff here. I got back to the house I'm staying at earlier when... Okay, number 5, volume control knob. Yeah, so it behaves a little weirdly then. But I went down to the makerspace for the game night I was hosting. Had one person show up, and we talked about the game that I made a couple months ago, and might redesign a few aspects of the visuals to take into account some expansion possibilities. But overall, I think I'm ready to do a finished piece of artwork for that to post it on Tumblr and make it so that people can download it on my Tumblr. The couple of the guys were there. One of the guys says he thinks it would be possible to use the laser cutter to cut out the pattern on the board game on a piece of wood and do some inlaid wire. I'm like, that's marking up the complications of the product. It's a lot of manufacturing work. So that was some of what we were doing. We were talking about variations on how we can adjust the rules and whatnot. And we are once again in another tabletop game design month, so I gotta come up with a new game this week, don't I? Yeah. So what kind of game do we want to play? Do we want to do dice? Do we want to do cards? Let's do a little research online. Yeah, I had to install Chrome, had to install the webcam, had to install the mic, had to get signed into my account on my laptop, and it's been so long since I've signed into YouTube that I had to go hunt down and get the password emailed to me so that I could check it, redo it. Yeah, I was like, I need to do better at storing this data, or at least get familiar enough with signing in that I can do it regularly, easily. So now let's try types of tabletop games. And see, like, I think of card, dice, and board games, but I want to see if there's something I'm forgetting. So board games, card games, dice game, paper and pencil games, role-playing games. Paper and pencil is like Battleship, Connect 5, Dots and Boxes, Hangman. Okay. Strategy game, that would be war games, like I guess that would be like Risk. Wouldn't that be a board game though? Tile-based games. Okay, puzzles, anagrams, dominoes, mahjong, tangrams. Huh, all right. Elements of chance. Deterministic. Stochastic? Never heard of that. So that's stochastic would be like backgammon, Monopoly, craps, roulette, Yahtzee, pig, scribbage, parcheesi. Deterministic would be chess, shogi, mancala. All right, so games in which outcome uncertainty plays a role are referred to as stochastic games, as opposed to deterministic. I like an aspect of deterministic gameplay. Games in which outcome uncertainty plays a role. So that's like games of chance. Not being visible or due to simultaneous move characters of the game. Games in which state uncertainty plays a role are referred to as a partial or imperfect information games, as opposed to full or perfect information games. So an partial or imperfect information deterministic game would be Battleship or Mastermind. Okay. Wow, I didn't realize there was such a strong infrastructure for game determinism. There's a whole school of philosophy behind the different patterns of doing this, apparently. So adventure game Adventure board game, adventure game books. That sounds almost like my choose your own adventure stuff. Adventure board game is a board game in which a player plays a unique individual character that improves through gameplay. This improvement is commonly reflected in terms of increasing character attributes, but also receiving new abilities and equipment. Adventure game book is a work of printed fiction. Yeah, I have a few of those. That allows the reader to participate in the story by making choices. The narrative branches along various paths, typically through the use of numbered paragraphs or pages. Yeah, that's a choose your own adventure. Okay, so an adventure board game. I'm kind of curious about this here. It's not quite the same as the adventure game books. This one sounds like it can be a legitimate board game. Adventure board game is a board game in which the player plays a unique individual character that improves through gameplay. This improvement is commonly reflected in terms of increasing character attributes, but also in receiving new abilities or equipment. Adventure board games often integrate various role-playing game mechanics, such as experience points and character creation, onto the board game format. The origin of these two types of games are related. In the early 1970s, Dave Arneson introduced his role-playing game Blackmoor to a group of players. One of these games, Gary Gygax, collaborated with Arneson to create Dungeons and Dragons. Another member of the gaming group, Dave Megarry, translated the experience into the board game Dungeon, the first adventure board game. In fact, the term adventure gaming in 1970s referred to what later became known as tabletop role-playing games and only later became associated with board games. The genre saw a boom in the 1980s when its key subgenre had been codified by three major releases of the decade. Games Workshop Talisman, Arkham... Oh! Hero Quest. I have a friend who's doing some of that. But it reminds me, I have an old. It's a board game called Dark Tower, and it was my dad's game, and it sat in a garage for, I want to say, 20 some odd years. And a family member was clearing out a garage or a barn and found it in there. And I've got it in storage. I think it needs some minor repairs to get up and running, but I have it somewhere. And the way this board game was played was, actually, see if I can bring up a picture on the screen and show it to you. Dark Tower board game. So let's see what we can get going here. Images. So let's see if we can do this. No, I didn't want that to happen. That's not where I was going with that. Oh, that's an ad. That's why. All right, so the way this game worked, don't get too dizzy here. Okay, so I don't know how well you can see that because I'm trying not to freak the camera out by pointing it at itself. But the way this worked here is you had the tower here that had these little light up windows and light bulbs behind them, and this little punch panel on the front. And then you had the circular board all around it, and you had, I think, 4 buildings. And at each building, you had to acquire items that increased your abilities to some degree or another, and you needed one of all 4 items or something to go and attack the tower and try to defeat the evil wizard. And if you didn't have enough, you were likely to fail, and it would laugh at you or something like that as you died. It was such a weird, interesting game design. I thought it was amazing when I was a kid, when my dad was playing it with my uncle. But let's see if I can get a couple other pictures. It's a great picture right there. That is 80s in its heart. All right. So, and part of it was you had to acquire, I think, 3 keys and a sword or something like that. I can't remember the specifics. I'll see if I can dig up the data. Just give me a second here. Did I lose you at any point there? Nope. Okay, we're good. Okay, so Dark Tower board game. Laptop's getting very hot, but it's doing pretty good tonight. You're not having any signal drop tonight? Well, sometimes you don't, but I may try to do it on this from now on and see if we do better signal and stability wise consecutive nights, because I know there have been some nights where you're okay and some nights you're not. I'm still at the place I'm staying. That's right. I was going to stay at the Makerspace tonight and try out, see if I could do an OBS. I'll try it some other night. But for right now, we seem to be doing all right. So Dark Tower board game. All post. See if we can pull up. So this feels like something I might be doing a version of. So an adventure board game. There we go. Dark Tower game. Adventure board game. Sounds like my style of game here. Okay, Dark Tower is an electronic board game by Milton Bradley for 1 to 4 players. The object of the game is to amass an army, collect the 3 keys to the tower, and defeat the evil within. The game came out during the height of the role-playing game craze in the 80s. Advertising for the game included a television commercial featuring Orson Welles. Goodness. Components. Gameplay. The game consisted of battery-powered center unit, the Dark Tower, circular cardboard game board divided into 4 interlocking quarters, 4 cardboard tokens, several plastic flags, playing pieces, and locations which are placed in holes in the board. Okay. In addition, there are several peg boards with red battleship-type pegs used to keep track of a player's number of troops, gold, and food. The tower itself consists of a small membrane keyboard beneath a display. Behind the cover is a carousel containing a number of film cells, which, when backlit by one of 3 lights mounted underneath, display the appropriate picture on the display cover. The display cover also conceals a digital LED display. Goodness, this was pretty complicated for a game in the 80s. For representing the numbers up to 99. As the tower rotates and illuminates the appropriate cell during gameplay, it also emits sounds for the events represented by each cell. To play, each player takes turns rotating the tower to face them and then moving about the board. The quarter of the board in front of the particular player is their territory. Gameplay proceeds by moving a player's token 1 space and then pressing a button on the tower that corresponds to the type of space, either sanctuary, tomb, bazaar, or frontier. The tower then resolves what happens to the player by showing the player the appropriate cell and reporting whatever occurs. For instance, if the tower decides that the player has encountered brigands, it will turn to the brigand's cell, simultaneously displaying the number of brigands encountered. If the player chooses to fight, the tower resolves the battle by alternately counting off the remaining number of friendly troops and brigands. Once all events have resolved, the tower is rotated to the next player, and their turn begins. Each territory besides a player's own contains one of 3 keys: bronze, silver, and gold, in that order, needed to unlock the tower. So each territory besides a player's own. The location of the key is randomly determined by the tower. Each player will therefore need to travel counterclockwise around the board through each of the other player's territories until the player has all the 3 keys. At this point, the player returns to his or her territory, buys reinforcements, and then attempts to attack the tower, which contains a predetermined number of the defenders inside. The first player to beat the tower wins the game. Losing requires building up another army. Okay, well, that's pretty complicated. I guess that's sort of the nature of the beast, though. It's clearly a game that has role-playing elements. So this is, I guess, an iconic example of a adventure game in that category. This might be something I do. It sounds super complicated, though. Okay, so in the 1990s, the collectible card games kind of caused a decline in popularity, apparently. Oh, apparently they're calling Arkham Horror and Descent Journey into the Dark adventure board games. So I'll look those up. Atlas Games card-based Dungeoneer and Pegasus Return of Heroes. Which one was the earliest example of the genre to employ Eurogame mechanics? Something Fantasy Flight Games also embraced in their own. What are Eurogame mechanics? A Eurogame, also called a German-style board game, German game, and Euro-style game, is a classic tabletop game that generally have indirect player interaction and abstract physical components. Euro-style games emphasize strategy while downplaying luck and conflict. All right, so let's have a look-see at that. In the 2010, the adventure board game genre had returned to its roots with Wizards of the Coast. The new owner of Dungeons & Dragons began publishing their own cooperative fantasy adventure games based on the 4th edition of D&D. So Castle Ravenloft, Wrath of Ashes something or other, and Legend of Drizzt. Okay, so Eurogames. So it sounds like I would be inclined to do I'm inclined towards I like games that are adventure games, and it sounds like Euro games are a little more my style. I do like a good role-playing game. I played my first round of D&D in decades a week ago. That was a callback to way back when. Strategy games. So war game, government simulation. I'm thinking that's like Risk. Let's see if I can pull some data up on those. Miniature games. Okay, so that would be more like Warhammer. So strategy games is what they're classifying as things like Warhammer or stuff like that. Tile-based games would be anagrams, tangrams, dominoes, mahjong. Let's see if there are any unusual, interesting things in that category. Role-playing games I get. Paper and pencil games would be like Battleship, Connect 5, Dots and Boxes, Hangman, Sprouts, and Sudoku. I think that's a hard genre to create something new in, though. Paper and pencil. Dice games would be Bunko, Craps, Farkle, Poker Dice, Sickbo, Yahtzee, Zombie Dice. I'm trying to remember. There's another one like that. Oh, you know, I think like I did a game a while back that was a tile-based game, I think, called Hive. Yeah, it's a tile-based game, but I think it's also falls under like a board game classification, which they're saying here is like backgammon and chess. Okay, so it really feels like board game, card game, dice game, paper and pencil game, miniature game, and tile games are their main ones. And I would say adventure game sounds like it's a subset. So you could have an adventure card game or an adventure board game or an adventure dice game would be interesting. And then role playing would be a subset of pencil and paper or miniature gaming, depending on how you play it. Tile-based games. I don't know. It seems like there's a lot of cross-pollination or alternation between that. So let's see. Euro games are also called, yep, we already got that one. Euro style games that emphasize strategy while downplaying luck and conflict. They tend to have economic themes rather than military and usually keep all the players in the game until it ends. Euro games are sometimes contrasted with American style board games, which generally involve more luck, conflict, and drama. Euro games are usually less abstract than chess or Go, but more abstract than war games. Likewise, they generally require more thought and planning than party games, such as Pictionary and Trivial Pursuit. Okay, so history. Characteristics. Usually multiplayer and can be learned easily and played in relatively short time. Perhaps multiple times in a single session. A certain amount of socializing might typically be expected during gameplay, as opposed to relative silence sometimes expected during strategy games like chess and Go. Euro games also differ from abstract strategy games like chess by using themes tied to specific locales and emphasize individual development and comparative achievement rather than direct conflict. They also emphasize mechanical challenge of their system over having the system match the theme of the game. They're generally simpler than the war games that flourished in the 70s and 80s, but nonetheless often have considerable depth of play. Tigris and Euphrates and Caelus. One consequence of increasing popularity of this game has been an expansion upwards in complexity. Games such as Puerto Rico that were considered quite complex when Eurogames proliferated in the United States after the turn of the millennium are now the norm, with newer, higher-end titles like Terra Mystica and Tzolk'in being significantly more difficult to master. Eurogames tend to have a theme, a role-play element, or a background story. More like Monopoly or Clue rather than poker or tic-tac-toe. Game mechanics are not restricted by the theme. However, unlike a simulation game, the theme of Eurogame is often merely mnemonic. It is somewhat common for games to be designed with one theme and published with another, or for the same game to be given a significantly different theme for later republication, or for two games on wildly different themes to have very similar mechanics. Okay, examples. Carcassonne. Build a medieval landscape complete with walled cities, monasteries, and roads. Puerto Rico. Develop plantations on the island of Puerto Rico. Imperial. As an international investor, influenced the politics of pre-World War I Europe empires. Bruxelles. Take the role of an Art Nouveau architect during the late 19th century and try to become the most famous architect in Belgium. Good Lord, there's some really weird ones out there. So it looks like simplified rule systems, like a simple set of rules that can achieve a lot. Playing time varies from half an hour to a few hours, with 1 to 2 hours being typical. In contrast, games such as Risk or Monopoly, in which a close game can extend indefinitely, Eurogames usually have a mechanism to stop the gameplay within a stated playtime. Common mechanisms include predetermined winning score, a set number of game turns, or depletion of limited game resources. For example, Ra and Carcassonne had limited tiles to exhaust. Low randomness, no player elimination is a usual tactic. So it sounds like you're playing a game where it's not a dice or a spinner. I would almost say that my my Cyberpunk game falls in this, because your movement is based off of rationing your point values. It has low randomness. The rules are pretty straightforward. Nobody dies, so that they're not out of the game. You're just there at all times. Pretty straightforward. I guess that's the genre that my Cyberpunk game falls in. So okay, that makes a little bit of sense. I get that now. That does feel like a kind of game that I will favor. So a lot of my game design ideas will probably be in that area. So what do we got? Government simulation games. Or a political simulation is a game that attempts to simulate the government and politics of a particular nation. These games may include geopolitical situations involving the formation and execution of foreign policy. These sound boring. The creation of domestic political policies, or the simulation of political campaigns. They differ from the genre of classic war games due to their discouragement or abstraction of military or action elements. Wow, what are examples of this? Oh, it sounds like it tends to favor like Sims style gaming, which like SimCity. Examples. Okay, what do we got here? Do I know any of these? I don't think I've ever heard of any of these. Commander-in-Chief, Bandit Kings of Ancient China, Balance of Power, Crisis in the Kremlin, Crusade Kings, Cyber Judas. Never heard of that one. Sounds pretty. It's a presidential simulation video game. Okay, so a lot of this sounds like, okay, Diplomacy that's got to be a board game. It's a strategic board game created by Alan something or other, released commercially in '59. Its main distinction from most board war games are its negotiation phases and the absence of dice or other game elements that produce random effects. Huh. I might actually even have a copy of that somewhere. Floor 13, Hidden Agenda, Masters of the World, President-elect, President Forever, Republic of Rome, Romance of the Three Kingdoms, Rulers of Nations, Shadow President, Superpower, Supreme Ruler Series, Political Machine, Twilight Struggle. Yeah, that does not sound like my genre of game at all. That sounds frustrating and annoying. So tile-based games. Anagrams, Chinese dominoes, Mahjong, okay, Quadominoes, Quirkle. That was the one I was thinking of earlier. I was going to say, I know a tile game, and Quirkle is one I played. I played that with family using non-rectangular tiles. Hive. There you go. That was the one I mentioned earlier too. Forbidden Island. Oh, so yeah, it looks like tiles is just they're using things on here like there's a tile board games too. So like Carcassonne is considered a tile game. Betrayal at House on the Hill, Alhambra, Forbidden Island, Galaxy Trucker, Gold Mine, Saboteur, The Settlers of Catan. That's one a lot of people know. So that seems like a hybrid between tile-based games and board game styles. Okay, so we've got that. I may come back to tile-style games at another time. I don't know that I'm practiced enough in the ways to use that to do a lot of interesting things with it. Pen and paper and pencil games. Yeah, this would be like Tic-Tac-Toe, Dots and Boxes, Hangman, Connect 4, or Connect 5, I guess. Battleship, Paper Soccer, Golf. So that would be super hard to create a new style game to play. And it's not a super marketable type of game. Like it seems like a paper and pencil style game, as they're referring to it here, would be something that you could come up with the mechanics like that. Like it's a game of overlapping circles, and whoever manages to build a circle with the least overlap between circles around another circle, with gameplay being that if you overlap your circle onto an opponent's circle, the area of overlap between yours and theirs, the calculated area of that overlap gets a point value for each player. Something like that. that would be a game style that you could make as a pen and paper game, but the mechanism, like, it's it's not a marketable game in a lot of ways. Like, once you've created that type of gameplay, um, there, I do believe there is a Trump board game. I've seen a few of them in thrift shops over the years, and I'm sort of like, ooh, do I want to? Like, I don't imagine there's going to be a lot of interesting gameplay in that. It's just going to be the art of the deal. It's going to be a terrible game. But now the pen and paper style games, like, I could make a pen and paper style game, I think, and it would be like, once you figure out how to do it, the only thing there is the rules and how you play it that you can publish. And for the most part, that's going to be like a one sheet rule set. And I don't know that there's a lot of market for being able to try to do that. And not that, it has to be a marketable thing, but that's sort of some of the theme I'm working on. And I feel like it would be a fun achievement. Well, an example like tic-tac-toe, hangman, Sudokus are a type of pen and paper game. And so if you know a Sudoku, that's like a bunch of boxes with numbers in them, and you have to figure out, based off of a set of basic rules, exactly what numbers must go in those. Crossword puzzles, those types of things are all pen and paper games. And there's like mazes would be pretty easily. I used to do that when I was younger, actually. I think I might have mentioned this at one point. I did an entire year where every day of the year I drew a hand-drawn maze. And so somewhere I have a stack of 365 hand-drawn mazes. And then the next year I said, okay, let's do word puzzles. And so it was like the word search, where you circle the word in a bunch of letters. And I think I did anagram, no, not anagrams, rebus style word puzzles, where somebody puts a bumblebee with the plus letter T, and it's beat, and so you do stuff like that. So, but that essentially the style of what a pen and paper game is. It's not something that you can. It's not a game you can purchase and play with friends and family. It's sort of like, it's either you can always do it. So like hangman, somebody thinks up a word and they make a bunch of dashes and you have to guess, and each guess costs them until they've run out of chances. And it's sort of like those types of mechanics would be a pen and paper game. It's something you can keep track of the score, and that the actions a player can make are limited and simple. Dots and boxes is another one. That's a series of dots in a square, and you're trying to, by making a line from one dot to another, either vertically or horizontally, you're trying to build so that whoever closes a box gets a point and gets another move. And there's a way to play that game where by the end, all the boxes are made and somebody has a higher score. Now, there's some strategies and tactics if you know how to play, you can always win. But it's not usually typical that there's a hack like that lets you be a winner 90% of the time. But Dots and boxes style games are very simple. Poo games, like poop emoji games or something. Yeah, I mean that it it's it's figuring out a fun, simple game that two people can play with nothing but a pen and paper. And uh, if you had come up with, say, 3 to 5 different types of pen and paper game, and maybe next time I do a board game style game, it might be fun to do a pen and paper set and come up with a different type. It might be fun to do a week where I come up with every day I do a 1 to 3 simple, like a Sudoku or a word search puzzle. It would be fun to do that again for a week. But what I would probably end up having to do is, like, it's not enough to make one game like that. Like making the Cyberpunk game that I made 3 months ago. Um, that one is that is something that I made the game once, and it's something that people could play over and over again, um, and get a different type of gameplay. Pen and paper games are sort of like connect the dots and stuff like that. You kind of get one use out of it. And so if you were to do pen and paper games like this for, make a product that you can sell kind of games, what you'd want to do is build a book. It's like a children's activity book, essentially. Games of Hangman, Word Search, and Sudokus, and mazes, all in one book. And you do like 10 pages a day for a week. You'd have 70 pages of puzzles and games for people to play with pen and paper. That's a very different kind of game creation that I'm not inclined to do too many of that kind of thing, but I might do it as an example at a later date. Um, but yeah, the tabletop games, Euro style tabletop game, adventure style, feels like what I want to do. But that it also feels like that would be a really, really complicated game to do. And it may require more than a week to put the time and effort into. Poker dice, sick bow, Yahtzee, zombie dice. Oh, I remember seeing zombie dice. I don't remember what the focus of that was. Farkle is a dice game that has also been called by, or is similar to, 1,000, 5,000, 10,000. Cosmic Wimp Out, Greed, Hot Dice, Squelch, Zilch, or Zonk. Dates back to the 80s. Yeah, I don't know. Dice games are hard to get right. Ludo, Farkle, Kismet, Boggle. They're very chance-based games, and that's not super my style. Battle Dice, Dice Land, Dragon Dice. I might have seen Dragon Dice at one point. Card games. I'm still thinking it's probably going to be. How are we doing on time? We're approaching in an hour. So adventure games or another board game similar to that Cyberpunk game I did might be an option. Card playing games. I don't know that I've figured out what I want to do with that yet. Trick games, match games, shedding games, accumulation games, fishing games, comparing games, solitaire games, drinking card games. That sounds like it could get dangerous fast. Multi-genre games. Many card games borrow from collectible card games. Okay, so that would be like Magic the Gathering, yeah, and Yu-Gi-Oh. Casino card games. Okay, so the first game that I came up with is a card game years ago. It's I guess we would call it a collectible card game. I don't know about that. It's called Runcible Foods. And it's a game that involves combining things in way like a judge game where a judge decides whose combination is the most likely to win that round. I like that style of mechanic. I think I was playing around with an idea for a similar but different way to do that. Games of strategy between two players. Multiplayer exists too. Both have their own personality. Personally built deck constructed from a very large pool of individually unique cards. The cards have different effects, costs, and art. Obtaining the different cards makes the game a collectible, and cards are sold or traded on the secondary market. So that's not the way I did my game. How would I call mine then? So Uno is considered a different type of card game. Simulation card games, a deck of either customized dedicated cards or standard deck of playing cards with assigned meanings is used to simulate the actions of another activity. For example, card football. Fictional card games. There's a category for fictional card games. Many games, including card games, are fabricated by science fiction authors and screenwriters to distance a culture depicted in the story. Yep. List of fictional card games. So what would Runcible Cards be? It's not a collectible card game. Drinking card game, solitaire, comparing games. It's sort of a comparing card game. Comparing card games are those where hand values are compared to determine the winner, also known as a vying or showdown. So it's very similar to a comparing card game, except for the competition is for a value set by the whim of a third party. So it would be something like you have a impartial party and two or more other players competing for best in show or to achieve some point, and the impartial person judges who achieved it best. And so I think that is a comparing, what is it? What they call it? A comparing game. There is an accumulation aspect. Or maybe it's a trick taking. Yeah, it's more trick taking. Trick taking is the object of trick taking games is based on the play of multiple rounds or tricks, and each of which each player plays a single card from their hand, and based on the value of played cards, one player wins or takes the trick. The specific object varies with each game. So it's a trick taking comparing game, I guess is what I would call it. And I might work on something like that. So I think right now what it's down to is if I do a card game, it's going to be something like that, a trick-taking comparison game. Maybe not even trick-taking. I'll look through those again. But then it's if it's not that I do, if I do a board game instead, it's going to be a Euro style game. I'm aiming for an adventure game. So I will brainstorm up tonight some adventure game concepts and try to figure out how difficult they will be to achieve. Because they sound like a complicated way to build a game. And like they have a lot of moving parts, a lot of requirements, and they would be harder to do than any other style. I'm losing myself here. You're starting to get the top of the curtain. All right. We are now at 11 p.m. almost. Well, we're a little past 11, and we're coming up on 1 hour. So I will cut it here for tonight. Thank you again for the camera and the microphone. Hopefully the quality is a little bit better tonight, and I will get a listen to and compare them. I will compare them and see how much better they sound. But I will be back tomorrow. I promise I won't. Well, I'm going to be careful. I promise to try not to do any poop-based games. But it's sort of like that old joke. Don't think of a polar bear in a snowstorm or something like that. Don't think of an elephant. And of course, once I've said that, so now that we've said no poop games, I'm going to go away from here, and it's going to be the thing that keeps popping into my head the easiest. But I will work on some concepts for game design tonight. I also need to do some video editing, but I should be able to narrow it down by tomorrow and then start to figure out what's the best one to carry forward. So I've got the rest of this week to finish up a game. I think if I ever do any of those paper-based games, paper and pen-based games, I may do one of those as one per, probably more than one per day, a bunch per day, and compile them into a book for sale. I'll keep that in mind for a future episode. Alrighty, so I'm going to call it here for tonight. Thanks for joining me, and thanks for supporting the channel. Have a good one. All right. Yeah, that's what I hope. It may be the mic and the mic doing better audio. The camera's probably better. The laptop has more RAM, so that might be helping too. Alrighty. So, toodles.